Today we're going to be introducing a Bronze Age cemetery found at Tarves, Aberdeenshire, and excavated by Cameron Archaeology during September and October 2021. I'm just the warm-up act introducing the cemetery itself before I hand you over to the wonderful Alison Sheridan, who's going to discuss our star spacer plate necklace find. So I'll first introduce the site location and then sprint round some of the key features, which included post hole alignments, ring ditches, cremation deposits, a possible pyre, and our grave with jet and amber artifacts. The site itself was located on the western fringe of Tarves. Tarves itself is set in quite a wide valley on a slight rise between four low hills to the north, east, south, and west. And the archaeology was actually concentrated on a natural mound shown in red here on the topographic diagram, and this little faint four lighter dots you can see is actually a ring ditch under excavation, shown here over on the eastern side of the site. All the ring features you can see there were concentrated towards the summit of that natural mound and along the southern flank. We had a cluster of cremation deposits to the northwest, a further loose association of cremation deposits and other features towards the southwest, including quite a few areas of scorching on the far southwest on the lower, flatter ground of the site. And two post hole alignments, I hope you can see them there, of 3 post holes each, features 79 to 81 and 39 to 41. Those post hole alignments, short but sweet. The northern alignment was east, south, east, west, northwest. The southern east, northeast, west, southwest. The northern alignment was of particular interest because in the central post hole, we found a cluster of packing stones, and the large stone you can see at the base there, when it was removed and turned over, proved to be cut marks. So we've got a lovely pecked cut mark towards the narrow end of that. Moving quickly onto our ring ditches and circular features. 16 in total, one larger, about 8 meters, it's actually 8.2 meters in diameter, 2 medium size around 4 meters in diameter, and 13 smaller, either around about the 3 meter or less diameter. Our large ring ditch was 8.2 meters in diameter, survived to a depth of 30 centimeters. We believe it was a continuous ring. We didn't find any causeway breaches within the ring. The upper fill was stony, filled with large angular stones, particularly in the northwest quadrant. The lower fills were quite rich in charcoal, including remnants of a charcoal plank. And we found prehistoric pottery sherds within sectors to the east, south, and west. Within the larger ring ditch was a smaller ring ditch, feature 56, which in turn surrounded a cremation burial. So we've got a ring within a ring with a cremation deposit in the center. The smaller ring ditch was less well preserved, only 16 centimeters of archaeology within that, but we did manage to retrieve pottery sherds from there. The medium-sized ring ditches, around 4 meters in diameter, were characterized by being shallow ditches with post holes set within them. At the moment, we don't know whether those post holes and ditches are contemporary or mark different phases of construction of these monuments. Within ring ditch 46, we found pottery sherds. Within ring ditch 74, we found fragments of possible struck quartz. Then the smaller features, well, generally 3 meters or less in diameter. I'm calling them ring features rather than ring ditches because the level of preservation was so poor in some cases, all we could see was a very faint outline of iron pan joining occasional blobs of darker deposit. There were some differences in that ring feature 75 on the left there was a series of beam slots, and 3 of these smaller ring features, like the ring feature within the large ring ditch, encircled cremations. Moving on to those cremations, 14 in total, 4 of which were found in conjunction with urns or pottery vessels. As you can see, we had a large cluster to the northwest, 4 within ring ditches, and a loose cluster associated with our possible pyre feature 122 and our big pit 126. And there was just 1 single cremation on its own out to the southeast. The cremation vessels were very varied. Beautiful inverted vase urn and the encrusted urn shown post-excavation. They were found in the loose southwest cluster of cremations near the possible pyre and pit, whereas the central urn here and small food vessel were from the northwest cluster of cremation deposits. Do we have a pyre? We don't. We're not sure at the moment, but we do have a possible feature here. This lovely oval pit with 4 post holes surrounding the northern side of it. The fills were rich in charcoal, had small fragments of burnt clay and a sparse scattering of burnt bone throughout. As yet, we don't know whether this bone is human or not, but beneath the fills, we had this startling red-orange scorching of the subsoil, indicative of intense burning. And there were further areas of scorched subsoil in the southwest area where this pit was found, but there was no archaeology surviving above the scorching. And then moving on to our final feature, the top left image there, very unpromising looking heap of stones, but fortunately Jacob and Sevgi stepped forward, cleaned it back beautifully to reveal this pit, carried on digging and got down to a lovely dark deposit just northwest of centre there. And within that, we found jet. Incredible variety of beads, from tiny spacer beads, that very small circle in the centre there, to the larger spacer plate beads. So at this point, I'll hand you over to Alison, who knows much more about it.
Thanks, Maura. So let's take a look at what the excavators found. And here we're reorientating the image with north roughly at the top. So you can see 3 spacer plates, all with their decorated side uppermost, plus 2 fusiform or barrel-shaped beads, and a small amber V-perforated object, all found within an area around 25 by 12 centimetres in the northwest quadrant of the grave. Sevgi and Jacob also found in this area, among loose sediment, a 4th spacer plate, a very small jet V-perforated button, 3 more fusiform beads, 1 complete teeny tiny amber bead and 2 fragments from probably 2 more amber beads, and 15 teeny disc beads, all under 5 millimeters in diameter, of which 6 were found in sets of 2, suggesting that they'd been strung. The teeny disc beads were found roughly in this area. The team then block lifted and wet sieved the rest of the fill of the grave, and from the same area, they retrieved a further 136 teeny beads and 5 more fusiform beads, so hats off to them for spotting these. They also found sherds of what looks to be an undecorated food vessel elsewhere in the grave, plus a few scraps of very poorly preserved, unburnt human bone. Ali Cameron then delivered the ornaments to me, and I proceeded to examine and document them in detail to look for signs of how they were made and used, how they articulated with each other, and whether they were old when they were buried. Here, for example, you can see one of the heavily worn spacer plates with its punctulated decoration arranged in a saltire shape, made by carefully drilling little hollows with a metal awl. I was lucky enough to have access to Dr. Mary Davis in the National Museum Scotland laboratory, who examined some of the items under a very high magnification microscope, making it easy to check, for example, whether the stuff in the punctulations was deliberate infill, as whitish infill has been found in several other spacer plate necklaces. And it was instantly clear from this that this wasn't deliberate infill, but it was just the sandy sediment from the grave fill. Similarly, the high magnification microscope was good at showing details of the perforations and any wear to them. Here you can see faint traces of rilling from the rotation of the drill in this hole in the small V-perforated button. And can also see that there's no sign of wear inside the hole from the thread that will have passed through the hole. So this object probably wasn't very old when it was buried. On the subject of thread, I got all excited when I spotted some incredibly thin material in some of the perforations, thinking it might be thread. But in one of those wonderfully random happenstances that life throws up, when I showed a picture of it to Moira, she instantly identified it as Basidiomycete mycelium, a natural fungal mycelium that must have grown inside the holes. Respect, Moira. And it turns out that before she entered the world of archaeology, Moira was a microbiologist specializing in fungal physiology. Handy or what? We'll come back to the question of thread in a moment. I was also able to get some of the black artifacts analysed by Dr. Laure Troilen in the NMS laboratory using X-ray fluorescent spectrometry to see whether they are all of jet. There were various signs suggesting that this was indeed the case. With this spacer plate, for example, it has the characteristic crisscross cracking that often occurs when jet dries out, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's also black, it's warm to the touch, it's light, and it has been polished to a high sheen, all signs of jet. And I'm happy to report that the X-ray fluorescence analysis confirmed that the black objects are indeed of jet, including the teeny disc beads. And moreover, they're most likely to have come from the area around Whitby in North Yorkshire, God's own country, some 336 kilometres to the southeast as the crow flies. In other words, several days' sail down the North Sea coast. The high iron peak that you see in this readout probably relates to iron in the sediment adhering to the spacer plate. This work had to take place before the items could be cleaned by the conservator, Julie Masson-McLean. Interestingly, there is some variation in texture among the jet objects, with some of the teeny disc beads and one of the fusiform beads appearing less compact and more prone to cracking and indeed breaking than the other jet objects. This is consistent with what we know about the raw material in the area around Whitby, and it shows that several discrete pieces of jet had been used to make these artifacts. As for the amber artifacts, there was no point in compositionally analysing them because all of the amber that's found in Britain and Ireland will be Baltic amber. The deposit that outcrops in northern Jutland runs under the North Sea, and considerable amounts of amber have been washed up and still get washed up in East Anglia. It also gets washed up along the North Sea coast of Britain, at least as far north as Aberdeen. But in this case, these little objects, it's arguably most likely that their raw material had been picked up as pebbles on the beach near Whitby. The teeny tiny wedge-shaped bead that you see on the left looks to be unmodified in its pebble shape, except for having a narrow hole around 1 millimetre in diameter drilled through it. It's only a little bit bigger than the tiny jet disc beads, and it could well have been strung in with them. As for the two fragments in the middle, these too will have been from teeny tiny beads. The object on the right, measuring around 15 by 8 millimetres, has a V perforation, and it could well have been used as a fastener. The person who made it went too far with the drill, as the two holes that form the V perforation have actually busted through the upper surface. The current appearance of the amber as opaque and crizzled is due to its oxidation. When new, these items may have been translucent and shiny like some of the beads on my necklace. The latest piece of work on the assemblage has consisted of cleaning and refitting of the fragmentary beads that's been done here in Aberdeen by Julie Masson-McLean. You can see some before and after views here. This is really fiddly and painstaking work, especially since the sediment from the grave really clings on to the objects. And Julie has also continued my work on the teeny disc beads, noting aspects of their shape and traces of their manufacture and wear. It's clear from the hourglass shape of many of the perforations that these beads must have been individually made, drilled from both sides, and then strung up and rolled against an abrasive material to achieve their smooth, round shape and their fairly consistent diameter, which ranges between 3.2 and 4.65 millimeters. During the cleaning of these beads, Julie alerted me to a possible fragment of actual thread in one of them, which I'll be subjecting to more high-powered microscopy back in Edinburgh. We know from the wedge-shaped amber bead that the thread must have been really narrow, yet strong. And there are various potential candidates, including linen, tree bast, and sinew. So watch this space, work continues. So, pulling it all together, what do we have? The grand total of objects is 4 spacer plates of jet, of which one is significantly smaller than the others, 10 jet fusiform beads, of which 3 are smaller than the others, 1 small jet V perforated so-called button, which could have been used as a fastener, 151 teeny jet disc beads, 1 amber V perforated fastener, 1 complete tiny amber bead, and 2 fragments of 2 further amber beads. What we seem to have is a fragmentary 3-strand spacer plate necklace, plus a fragmentary 3-strand spacer plate bracelet, both parts of a matching jewellery set, or a parure as they call it. Both the necklace and the bracelet had seen heavy wear, which is very, very clear. You can see it at the end of the beads, and you can see how the beads have actually ground into the perforations of the plates. And many components are missing. We can't say for sure whether these had been deposited as 2 items or strung together in some kind of Frankenstein piece of jewellery. Similarly, we can't say how or whether the tiny jet and amber beads and the V perforated items articulated with the fusiform beads and plates. The V perforated objects could have served as fasteners for the necklace and or bracelet, but they are much less worn than the plates and the fusiform beads, so they weren't originally part of the matching jewellery set. That the various components were strung in some way when deposited in the grave is suggested by the fact that the teeny disc beads tended to be found in pairs, as we've already noted. So next question, was the jewellery on the body or was it deposited beside it? It's hard to tell, but the fact that all the plates were lying with their decorated sides upwards suggests that it might not have been on the body, because otherwise you would expect to get more variety in orientation. If you think in terms of somebody lying on their side wearing a necklace, some of, as body decays, some of them are going to fall that a ways, and some of them are going to fall with their bottom, their inner side upwards. There had clearly been some bioturbation in the grave, leading to the shifting of some components. Elsewhere in Scotland, while some spacer plate necklaces had indeed been buried on the body, we know from a recent find at Dunragit in southwest Scotland that occasionally they were placed in the grave separately from the body. What we can say is that the jewellery is clearly of early Bronze Age date, probably between 2200 and 1900 BC, that it was made in and imported from North Yorkshire, and that the deceased is likely to have been a female, since this type of jewellery is consistently associated with women. This is the 58th find of jet spacer plate jewellery in Scotland. And while many spacer plate necklaces have more than 3 strands, there are parallels for 3-strand examples, as you can see here from the recent find from Dunragit and also from Blyn Mill in Duthie in Aberdeenshire, which is just 15 kilometres northwest of Tarves. Indeed, the Blyn Mill one includes 2 small amber beads. The condition and the completeness of spacer plate jewellery varies greatly. In some cases, it wasn't very old when it was buried. But at Tarves, we're looking at a treasured heirloom that had seen a lot of use and loss over several generations of wear. So this had been passed down the generations. The owner of this precious and rare jewellery must have been accorded a special high status in early Bronze Age society. And indeed, this grave could have been the initial grave in the whole cemetery. So back to you, Maura.
Thank you, Alison. So just to summarise, we have a Bronze Age cemetery with 2 post hole alignments. One post hole within those alignments contained a portable cut mark stone. We have 16 ring ditches or circular features. We had 14 cremation deposits, 4 of which had a variety of pottery vessels associated with them. We have a possible pyre, at least one possible pyre, and that the grave with that fantastic jet and amber jewellery collection. It is still very much a work in progress. We're awaiting so many specialist reports, and there's a lot more research going to be continuing on post-excavation. So all that remains is for me to thank Alison for her expert input all round for this. Our excavation team, no particular order, but Ellie did carry out our QGIS plotting and topography plotting for us. All our post-excavation specialists and Scotia Homes, whose site we were invading. Thank you very much.